One. Welcome back to another podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com, UNC football related, ACC football related, because earlier today, huge news. The ACC has a schedule. The people in Greensboro actually have been doing something with their time the last few weeks, and they have managed to come up with a football schedule for 2020, 10-game slate for 15 teams, the 15th one being Notre Dame. And I'd like to welcome very good friends of Tar Heel Illustrated, very good personal and professional friends of mine, two of the best in the business. They both write for the North State Journal here in the Triangle across the state, and they cover UNC as well, but they also write for the Sports Illustrated Maven sites. First, Shawn Krest, who covers Duke for the SI Maven site, and Brett Friedlander, who covers NC State for the SI Maven site. You guys do a lot of stuff.
Got to make a living.
Well, welcome. First time you guys have been on our Zoom podcast. I've had you guys on a ton of times when we used to do the older, more conventional podcast. So let's kind of jump right in it. About 4:30 today, about an hour and a half after I talked to you, Brett, when you said you heard that the schools had gotten the schedules, we find out, to me, I wrote a column, I said, it's kind of like Selection Sunday, when you're all of a sudden you look at this like, wow, who does everybody play? Where do they go? What does this mean? You know, how is this going to translate down the road? Because there was so much newness to it. And then, of course, you see that Notre Dame's in there, and it just put a charge into me, especially given the fact that the last few months has been a challenge coming up with interesting stuff to talk about. But now we finally get something.
I think the biggest thing that came out of this is the fact that Notre Dame is going to share its TV revenue from NBC with the other 14 teams. And I think that's huge because David Cutcliffe made a point of saying that if Notre Dame is going to be involved in this, that they should pay up. And good for John Swofford for making it happen.
Shawn?
Yeah, no, I agree. The Notre Dame news was huge. I was frankly surprised to see that. I assumed that Notre Dame usually gets the better of these types of negotiations. So I was assuming they were going to get to keep the lion's share of their NBC money and then share in the ACC stuff. So
I think what this tells us is, for the first time in our football watching lives, Notre Dame didn't hold all the cards. They need a season. And if you look at what's going on around the nation, the prospect of them trying to find a schedule that NBC would be happy with, that the nation would be happy with, because they would get a lot of ridicule if they're playing Bowling Green every week. I think Notre Dame had to do this, and the ACC was there to help Notre Dame, which I think positions the ACC very well in its quest to bring Notre Dame on down the road.
You know what they say, possession is 9/10 of the law, and especially when the ACC hires Jack Swarbrick to be its new commissioner after Swofford retires next year. I think this hastens Notre Dame. I think it was inevitable. Eventually, Notre Dame is going to end up being in the ACC. I think this is going to speed the process.
Shawn?
Yeah, Notre Dame was in a tough spot. They lost a quarter of their schedule. 3 or 4 of their games were against Pac-12 or Big Ten teams who have already canceled non-conference games. So they were scrambling to fill out a quarter of their schedule, and that's if everybody else agrees to keep them on the schedule. So they needed to do something desperately.
Yeah, and what I think is interesting, and Brett and I talked about this a little bit this afternoon, but if you're thinking in terms of why this makes sense for the league, and a lot of people are angry about it. They think, why are you helping out Notre Dame? What have they ever done for you? Well, John Swofford has not minced his words. The end game is to get Notre Dame in the ACC playing football. That's why they're in the league for everything else. They got the 6 games. They had 6 ACC teams on the schedule this year. But during World War II, Notre Dame played Navy. Navy said, yeah, we'll play you. Navy was a power 2 back then. They agreed to play Notre Dame when Notre Dame was scrambling for opponents. That's back when there were a lot of military-based teams, a lot of which were actually operating on campuses as well. Notre Dame wanted as normal a schedule as they could get, and Navy agreed to play them during that time. And Notre Dame has kind of rewarded Navy ever since then, playing them annually. If Notre Dame continues to kind of view things in the way that they did then, which I think is a standard that university has upheld itself to all these years, the ACC might get rewarded down the road for this as well.
Andrew knows what he's talking about, by the way, when it comes to Navy, because his dad has written a very, very good book called Navy War Football, and you should definitely get it. It's by Wilbur Jones. I've read it, and it's outstanding. But sorry about that.
But what do you guys think about that? Shawn?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think this has been the long-range plan, that Notre Dame needs to join this conference. And Notre Dame, if they were going to join a conference, I think they made it clear it was going to be the ACC a couple of years ago. I think this expedited things by several years. I don't know how long that have held out with this weird arrangement that they've had. I know that the games are scheduled almost to 2030, if not to 2030. So I think they were planning on doing this going forward. But yeah, I think we're going to see changes to that model. A lot of models across sports, but specifically that model, thanks to the pandemic here.
10 plus 1.
One thing that bringing Notre Dame in on a full-time basis, I think almost guarantees that the ACC is going to stick with, in the future, an 8-game conference schedule rather than going with 9, because I think that's the compromise, to give Notre Dame those 4 extra non-conference games so they can keep their rivalry with Southern Cal, with Navy, and then play a national game against Michigan every now and then, or BYU or something like that. So I think that there are a lot of things that need to be worked out. But I definitely think this is the trial balloon, and I think that it's a really good step forward, especially if the Irish win the ACC. But here's the thing that I want to know. Will they make the Irish wear an ACC patch on their uniforms and on the helmet? Because might as well, right? If they're going to be the champions, make them represent completely.
That's a Friedlanderism, isn't it, Shawn?
That certainly is. He would be the one to think of that.
Well, I think it's actually a really interesting question. Now that we're not going to just talk Notre Dame here. I cover UNC. This is TarHeelIllustrated.com, and if you're watching us on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated, we're going to hit on that. But it's more just the news and the fact that something very different occurred today for ACC football. As much as the last 4 months has sucked, and leading up to the announcement today was tough because we've had trouble coming up with live, relevant content on a daily basis that people are clamoring for. This was an explosion, in my opinion. And I think that this will pump a lot of life into people who care about college sports, people who care about the ACC and Notre Dame. And I think that regardless of what stadiums look like this season, if they play these 10 games, we're going to have a really good idea what the pecking order of this league is like instead of just an 8-game schedule. And the really cool thing is the better teams in the league, I think previously people were obviously looking at Clemson as the favorite to win it. Carolina is the favorite in the Coastal. They both play Notre Dame. So we're really going to kind of know what the hierarchy of the league looks like if it goes according to what we thought would be the form.
You know, what makes this even more of an explosion today is that everybody that I talked to over the last 48 hours said that the ACC was going to punt on this and they were going to hold off till the NCAA Council made its decision on fall championships next week. And I think from what I was told today, from the people I've talked to today, the ACC went ahead and made this decision basically to force the SEC's hand, because now the SEC basically has to do the same thing, because the ACC, in going to a 10+1 format, has left the door open for those rivalry games against Clemson, South Carolina, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Florida, Florida State, Louisville, Kentucky. And oh, by the way, NC State has got a very important non-conference home game scheduled with Mississippi State that it can now keep. And here's the thing, and I'm going to think like an NC State fan here. I'm going to think like I've only been doing this for about a year, but here's the thing. State doesn't play Clemson this year. First time since 1970 that Clemson's not on the schedule. There are no divisions. It's too good to be true, which means the season's going to be canceled and no game's going to be played.
Shawn.
John Swofford is retiring next year, but he showed that he still has a lot of that ninja left in him with this announcement today. The way that they put the SEC in a tough spot, because the SEC had been leaking that they were going to do conference only. And so now what the ACC has done is said, you can do that if you want to. If you don't want to play us in these rivalry games, then you can be the one to pull the plug on that. That's fine with us.
Since you brought up John Swofford, I'll go there. 15 years ago, a lot of people questioned whether or not Swofford was the guy that could keep the ACC together and lead it into the next, realm of college athletics. Well, what's happened? They've gone way north of the border multiple times with programs that are very happy in the league, by the way. Pitt, Syracuse, BC, you talk to those folks, they're very happy being a part of the ACC. Even Boeheim doesn't even complain anymore about it. And Brett, I can plug your Denny's column from about 8 years ago. But also, the TV network is here. You've got a national championship program every year in the league now in Clemson, so they have a dynamic program. And at some point FSU is going to return. Always the chance there with Miami, et cetera. And now Swofford's last year as commissioner under football, Fighting Irish are going to be a part of the league. I think that this guy deserves an unbelievable amount of credit for what he's been able to do for this league and give it the foundation and the stability that it has, and it's going to last into the future, regardless of what Notre Dame does in football in 2021.
The one thing that I think that he should be remembered for more than anything is that he's the man who saved the ACC, because instead of staying back and waiting and playing defense to try to keep, Florida State and Clemson and maybe even North Carolina and Duke from going to other conferences, he went out and fired a preemptive strike and went out and basically gutted the Big East and killed the Big East. But in doing so, he saved the ACC because, not only did he get all those teams in there, but then he made them all sign that grant of rights. And for the foreseeable future, the ACC is in a position of strength now, and so instead of getting rated, they were the team, the conference that basically was the foundation and the framework for how you're supposed to go forward in this new era.
Shawn, how will you write the John Swofford column when he goes to work for the last time in Greensboro?
I mean, they call him Ninja for a reason. He's like a duck. You never see how hard his legs are working underneath the water. He just seems to be kind of floating along. And meanwhile, he's planning all this stuff, and he's reshaping college football the way that he wants it to be. And he's been doing that for decades, and no one ever sees it coming. I mean, you can say that we never see it coming. That's fine. But the other commissioners don't seem to ever see it coming. He takes them all by surprise. So I think the fact that he's able to do that and have no one aware of it is really one of the more impressive things about his leadership. He's up there with David Stern as far as significant commissioners in sports, all of sports.
Chuck Amato once told me about Bobby Bowden, and he's the kind of guy that could smile, look you in the eye, and shake your hand, and you have no idea that his other hand is in your back pocket. Swofford has an element of that to him.
He absolutely does. He absolutely does. He seems laid back, nice Southern guy who doesn't have anything going on, and nothing could be. We've seen the evidence that nothing could be farther from the truth.
Besides, without him, we would never have the phrase geographic footprint.
Yeah, this is true. Okay. I want to go, we'll do that for another time, geographic footprint. We talk maybe again about Notre Dame. Let's look at this year's schedule, a 10+1. Do you guys like the 10+1? And what do you do with that one if it has to be someone that was not on your schedule? If you have, like UNC, unless they can get JMU to come, and I know JMU's still trying to play football, even though the CAA says they're not going to host a championship this year. What do you do with that other game? Do you play someone challenging, or do you play an in-state FCS, get yourself that easy game where you can get 80 guys in the game?
There are definitely teams that are looking for games. I mean, NCAA, their conference basically, scratched the whole season. They're hoping to play, so they're trying to put together a schedule. I would imagine that look, BYU is out there that's trying to play an independent schedule. So there are games to be had. I would imagine that you take whatever you could get. It's sort of like with East Carolina a couple of years ago when the hurricane, and actually NC State had the same thing, and with East Carolina, the hurricane wiped out some games, and they basically just took whoever was available and played that last week of the season to get the 12th game. So I think you take what's available. In NC State's case, it's already there because, like I said, the Mississippi State game is there, and since the SEC and the ACC are going to be working together, that's kind of a no-brainer.
Shawn, what would your approach be?
Well, I think you look at Duke's schedule, just for example. They're losing the Middle Tennessee State game, and they're replacing it with Florida State. They're losing the Elon game, and they're replacing it with a trip to Syracuse. So I think given how much harder you've just made your schedule by adding these conference games, you have to go cupcake. If I'm a coach, I'm going to be pushing for Duke has Charlotte on the schedule. I think they keep that Charlotte game, or they try to get Elon to come to Durham and keep that game and lose Charlotte. But I think you go as easy as possible in this non-conference game if you don't have a rivalry game.
I think if you're North Carolina, if you can get that Auburn game, in Chapel Hill, maybe strike up a new deal where you go to Auburn in the next couple of years, you play it. They have a chance, and their schedule's fairly challenging, but they have a chance if they play the potential to win a lot of those games. And they get Notre Dame at home. They don't have to play Clemson. They go to Tallahassee, but I don't think Florida State is quite what they're going to be in a few years if they ever do get back to normal. I think Carolina adding one more really tough game plus a 10-game ACC slate, if they have a vision of being really relevant at Thanksgiving, you got to play someone good outside the league.
AJ, it's sort of like the year that they went undefeated in the ACC until the championship game. You know, even as they were playing Clemson in that championship game, there were questions as to whether their schedule would allow them to get into the playoff. If you really think you're that good, if you really think that Sam Howell can bring you that far and your defense is good enough to be able to, you know, to outscore teams, then you really need that strength of schedule. And I think playing that Auburn game, I think, is essential. And having talked to Gary Stokan from the Peach Bowl, I think they want that game too. So I would do everything I could to keep that game if I were Bubba Cunningham.
What are your thoughts on that, Shawn?
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that it can't be in Georgia. They've got that rule that says that the non-conference game has to be in the state where the ACC school is located. So that's a blow to Stokan, because I know that he was looking forward and really hoping to hold on to that game. But yeah, if they can get Auburn to come to Chapel Hill, that's a big if. I don't know if Auburn's going to be willing to do it. But yeah, I think for UNC, they're in a very different boat than Duke, because they have these national hopes if everything goes right for them. Whereas I don't think Duke or NC State or most of the other schools have that option.
Okay, well, let's say for the sake of discussion, Auburn isn't going to happen, and you're in charge of Carolina's +1 game. How low would you go on the totem pole as an acceptable opponent before you get to Brett's point where you just take whoever you can get? Would you go Vanderbilt, for example? Would you try to keep it, you know, SEC? You can't get Big Ten, you can't get Pac-12. You're not going to get Big 12 to come all the way over this way. Or do you maybe go East Carolina? I know a lot of Carolina fans think that there's an awful lot of payback to be handed to the Pirates, because the last few times they played, the Pirates have kicked their tail. How do you kind of view this, guys?
I would say maybe a rematch with App. I would say maybe App State would be somebody that you could bring in, because that's going to give you strength of schedule. If you're going SEC, I would say Vanderbilt is a natural match for Wake Forest. So I would say maybe Tennessee would be the one to try to go after as far as an SEC team.
And that's what I would do too. I would start making phone calls to SEC schools, because there are going to be schools out there in the SEC that don't have a natural rival, and they're going to be looking to fill that +1 as well. So there are definitely matches that can be made there. But if you can't work out the details, you got to go first available. You got to go whatever you can get. And, you know, even if it means writing a check. And I know that in these days right now, especially with nobody in the stands, that would be painful, but you definitely don't want to only play 10 games. You want to play that 11.
All right, we'll play a little quick game here. Scale of 1 to 10, 10 meaning outstanding for the league. Notre Dame winning the ACC championship, I guess in Charlotte, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being outstanding, what would that mean for the league?
I don't think it would be that great for the league, to be honest with you. Now, having them in the championship game, yes. Getting throttled by Clemson, that would be the ultimate, John Swofford's, dream to walk out the door, drop the mic. But I don't necessarily think that you want Notre Dame, especially without that patch on there, to win the conference championship and to take that spot in the playoff. I think that they would prefer that not happen.
Shawn?
The ACC often gets criticized when Clemson's going for the title for their schedule and how Clemson has such an easy path to the playoff. For Notre Dame to walk in here in the first year and win that championship, I think would just underscore what everybody else has been saying. So, yeah, I think it would be, I would say 2 or 3 as far as a scale of 1 to 10.
All right. How about Notre Dame goes 5-5 in the league? Scale of 1 to 10. Brett?
10. Because like Shawn was saying, this would definitely reinforce the fact that, hey, we got a bad rap. We're a lot better than you think we are. And, it would definitely – it's not going to happen. But, I mean, it would definitely be a victory for the ACC.
Shawn?
I think it would hurt the chances of getting Notre Dame as a permanent member in the near future. So I would say 7 or 8 as far as 10. But as far as from an ACC standpoint, it would definitely be a 10.
Okay, from 1 to 10. How about the fact that Notre Dame is in the league this year? There's a 10-game schedule. Everything that we learned today. Scale of 1 to 10, Brett.
Oh, I think 10. I think it's very cool. It gives us something to think about. It gives us something to talk about. It's different, and it's different in a better way than putting a runner on second to start extra innings. And so I like it. But I'm also very skeptical because, just because they've decided that this is the way they're going to proceed, it doesn't guarantee they're actually going to be able to do it. I mean, there's still a lot that can happen here in the next 4 to 5 weeks or 6 weeks, because I think the September 7th through 12th is when they're going to start the season. the curve of this thing is not going in the right direction, especially in states that have ACC schools. And so there's still a lot of things that can happen between now and those first games.
Mr. Krest?
That curve has been going that way for months, and for the last couple of months, I know personally I've been preparing myself more and more for the possibility of no football. And then starting last week, when these rumors of the 10+1 model started to be floated out there, that gave me hope for the first time in a long time. So I think this is a very positive thing. It's very exciting. Even if it doesn't happen, I feel like this is a very positive in the world of sports to have this hope for the first time in a long time.
Here's something
my
to think
scale,
about, guys.
my scale 1 to 10s are Notre Dame winning the championship would be a 1. I think it'd be terrible for the league for the reason you guys articulated, certainly that Shawn hit on. I think Notre Dame going 5-5. I'm going to side with Shawn on this, because if you want, if you're asking them to stick their foot in your pool, you want them to like being in your pool so they come back. So I'm going to go with Shawn on that one. And today was an absolute 10. If we could go 11 or 12, I'd go 11 or 12 because it was awesome. We got something that occurred today that we could all talk about. That hasn't really happened in 4 months, 4.5 months.
And here's something else to think about, guys. I think that not just the ACC, but everybody in college football have to play. You can talk about curves all you like, but from a monetary standpoint, they need that TV money. And they also need, even though that there's not going to be a lot of people in the stands, they need to have their biggest donors to be in the stands to keep giving that money, because they've got a lot of bills to pay and they've got a lot of other sports to finance. And I think that they absolutely have to play at least some of this schedule with at least some people in the stands, because otherwise college sports as we know it may cease to exist.
Shawn, do you have a final thought on that?
Yeah, we're talking about Swofford remaking college sports. If they don't play football, it's going to be remade in a very different way because, there are a lot of athletic departments. Heck, there are some schools that may not make it through this crisis if we don't get some type of revenue coming in. And football is the best, easiest way to get that revenue.
One last thing here. You guys remember Notre Dame's first ACC basketball tournament, right? In Greensboro?
Yep.
And what'd they do?
Didn't they lose the first round in that one? Or did they win it? I can't remember now.
They didn't win it their first year.
The second year they won it.
Round, yeah. Because they had all the injuries. Their team was,
that's right. Yeah, second
remember?
Year.
Yeah. And then
it was in Greensboro. I'm thinking like they're in Greensboro, hallowed ground, Holly Farms, Sail with the Pilot, Swofford down the street. And they went in there and they beat Carolina in the title game. So they jumped in and they said, yeah, we're here, deal with us pretty quickly. Maybe something weird happens in football. I just think it's interesting to look back on, because people thought that when Notre Dame came in, boy, if they won the ACC tournament, how blasphemous would that be? Well, it really wasn't blasphemous. The sun kept coming up, and the league's still really strong. I think the league will survive this, guys. Regardless of what happens with Notre Dame football, I think it helps ACC football. If anything else, the nation's going to watch the league a little more this year than it would have.
Absolutely. And that's why, all the columns about how Swofford's getting played and all this stuff are totally wrong, because the Notre Dame is good for the ACC because A, the attention that you mentioned, B, the revenue that it generates, not only because of the NBC contract, but because the ACC network and ESPN, you're going to get half of those games. So it's definitely a good thing for the ACC in the long run.
Anything else, Shawn?
Yeah, and you've also got Notre Dame playing 4 more ACC games this year. That's 4 more teams that are getting that boost. If they're having fans in the stadium, they're getting that boost to the in-person attendance, but they're at least getting that boost as far as attention and TV eyeballs on them. So you're getting, whatever that is, a 66% increase in the number of teams that get that Notre Dame exposure this year.
Shawn Krest works for the North State Journal covering the ACC, also Duke, for the SI Duke Maven site. Brett Friedlander, also North State Journal. You guys are teammates there, the North State Journal. And Brett also writes for the SI Maven NC State site. You guys are around Chapel Hill a lot. You're all over the place. And about 85 years worth of combined experience here on this podcast. That makes me feel pretty damn old.
You're young compared to me.
Not that young. Guys, I appreciate it. You guys are both the best. You know how I think about you guys.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for stopping by. And by the way, go to TarHeelIllustrated.com. Check out all of our stuff covering Carolina's ACC schedule. as we dive into the 2020 football season that looks like it's actually going to be here. Thanks for stopping by.